Here's a quick summary of the argument in favor of looking at independent voters and independent parties and movements in Congress. And I want to talk about the comparison between John Anderson's case called Anderson versus Celebrezze in 1983, in which Ohio tried to keep them off the general election ballot for president. He ended up getting 6% of the vote, about the same as nationally and about the same as the Independence Party has been able to do. This is an argument against states protecting not the two-party system, but two specific parties. It hurt us, and this is a summary of the videos I posted to the Senate as to why Franken's election should be challenged, looked at, and he should not be seated. It hurt us in just the same way Ohio would have hurt John Anderson if they kept him off the ballot in Ohio in 1983. We're kept off the ballot by these practices in 2016 if this challenge is not upheld. The big national parties have a big advantage in spending over the Independence Party and other third parties, and they purchase email addresses for millions of dollars according to Ritchie and court filings. And to protect this industry and this disparity in access to voter emails puts a burden on less organized voters and parties, even if it were true that no Democrat other than Ritchie ever got access to voters and donors' email addresses. And the arguments presented by Ritchie and courts to get around the fact that all data collected by the state of Minnesota is presumed public unless specifically classified by the legislature otherwise is unjustifiable. The collection of email addresses is not even included in the provision they claim shows the legislature classified all these HAVA voter email addresses as non-public. The legislature simply has not done this. It's a big burden because it stops me from reaching and associating with and expressing my views to prospective voters. Again, keeping independent voters out of DFL caucuses because of our gender, race, or heterosexuality is a burden for us, and it violates the Constitution, and it cannot be justified, and it has not been justified. The situation Senator Franken and others are concerned about in Minnesota is similar to their concern in all the states and to Ohio in Anderson. Now I'm reading from that case. Supreme Court writes, respondent's brief explains that the state has a substantial interest in protecting the two major political parties from, quote, damaging intra-party feuding, unquote. According to respondent, a candidate's decision to abandon efforts to win the party primary and to run as an independent, quote, can be very damaging to state political party structure, unquote. Anderson's decision to run as an independent, respondent argues, that's Ohio, threatened to splinter the Ohio Republican Party by drawing away its activists to work in his independent campaign. But the Supreme Court has already answered this, and they go on. In Williams versus Rose, we squarely held that protecting the Republican and Democratic parties from external competition cannot justify the virtual exclusion of other political aspirants from the political arena. That's what's happened in this case. Franken has virtually, and using the media, excluded all other political aspirants except Mike McFadden. Now, addressing Ohio's claim that it may validly promote a two-party system in order to encourage compromise and political stability, the Supreme Court wrote in Williams versus Rhodes, the fact is, however, that the Ohio system does not merely favor a, quote, two-party system, unquote. It favors two particular parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, and in effect tends to give them a complete monopoly. There is, of course, no reason why two parties should retain a permanent monopoly on the right to have people vote for or against them. Competition in ideas and governmental policies is at the core of our electoral process and of the First Amendment freedoms. New parties struggling for their place must have the time and opportunity to organize in order to meet reasonable requirements for ballot position, just as the old parties have had in the past. Williams versus Rhodes. Thus, in Williams versus Rhodes, we concluded that the First Amendment values outweighed the state's interest in protecting the two major political parties. This is a very important case, Anderson versus Celebrezze. Similarly, this body of judges, the U.S. Senate, charged with protecting American democracy, needs to keep in mind the 58% of Americans who today want a third party because of dissatisfaction with Democrats and Republicans. And you can do this if you recall that we are constituted and founded on the requirements of the First Amendment. Money is not important. Only honest, true democracy, free, fair, and pure elections for your constitutional body, the U.S. Senate, are important. In other words, this U.S. Senate is created right in the U.S. Constitution. It's very important that it be an independent body that is not influenced by money, even by courts, not by the executive branch, certainly not by parties. Parties are not in the Constitution. The U.S. Senate is in the Constitution. We must put the Senate ahead of parties, ahead of the two major parties, Democrat and Republican. Now I ask you to look at these problems in Minnesota and hold up Senator Franken's seating until you are assured democracy is secure here in the 2014 elections. An attack on democracy in one state is an attack on democracy throughout the nation. We must uphold high standards and encourage civic duty and participation. Winning isn't everything. Democracy and responsible, truly principled governance is everything. Gridlock is unacceptable. Thank you for viewing these videos. They are intended as statements to you regarding this elections contest.